Thank you very much. I'm Tony Williams from Europe, Los Angeles. Thank you very much, Kamal, for your comments. I'll definitely be sitting with those for some time. It was amazing to be a part of this conversation. Typically, where my organization meets young adults is after they've left LAUSD. So our organization works with young adults 18 to 24, whom we've identified as opportunity youth. And these are essentially young adults for whom attending a four-year institution was not an option, or was not the best option for them. And so we step in to support opportunity youth to do what we call solving or closing the opportunity divide. And we recognize this divide as on the corporate side, organizations are looking for diverse entry-level talent, and they're located in cities and in areas where there's an ample number of opportunity youth. And the challenge seems to be this skills gap, right, between connecting those folks and making sure that they're prepared to go into those corporate spaces. And so Europe steps in and says, over the course of a year, we can prepare young adults to enter these corporate spaces. And I think in the way that we prepare young adults to meet those spaces, right, we one, see what the foundation, the fundamental math and science training has been, and then we are able to work with our community college partner, West LA, to really prepare them to enter those spaces. And I think we meet that education versus training challenge, right, in the way that we do that. And so the hard skills courses for us, for example, computer science, software, hardware, are taught by West LA professors, whereas our staff does what we call soft skills training, but they're sometimes the harder skills, right? Time management, conflict management, salary negotiation, advocacy in a corporate space, those things that young adults who have either not worked before or who have not been in a corporate space before might not have experience doing. And our program aims to prepare them to do all of those things. And I think we've been really, really successful right at that work. In LA, our goal is to grow their W-2 over time, and the average entry-level salary for our young adults after our program is about $22. And we're really proud of that number. We're proud of the corporate partners that we work with, and I think this is a great segue between sessions, right, in terms of how we get that done. And I think we're able to be successful in supporting young adults coming into tech spaces and various business spaces for two reasons. I think it's the connections we have with people, as well as the return on investment that we provide. When we talk about large corporations and companies, I think we sometimes forget that they're made up of people, right? And some of those people are in this room and support the work that we do. We're really happy to have our partners from Marcia McLennan, Sony, Getty, Snap to join us today on the other side of the work that Europe does to support our young adults. And we have folks that are in those organizations who reach out to us, right? Or when we approach them and say, hey, we've got this group of young adults that you otherwise wouldn't have considered, that we know are ambitious, that we know work hard, and that we know can fill these entry-level roles. And those folks are the ones, right, that really kind of give us an entry into the organizations and give our young adults the opportunity that they have earned over the course of the time that they've been with us. The second component, I think, to our success is really the return on investment that we provide. We typically enter our partnerships or our organizations from a philanthropic standpoint, right? They're giving these young adults an opportunity that they've worked for and an opportunity to prove that what they can do. But our goal, right, is to transition that philanthropic relationship into a partnership where they view our young adults as a talent pipeline. And that typically happens, right, over cycle and over a bit of time when our young adults get there and they understand, right, that if it were not for our program, right, our young adult wouldn't have been able to hit submit on an internship application because they were not pursuing a four-year degree, right? After that, they would not have been able to hit submit on a job application because they did not have a four-year degree. And I think that relationship grows into an investment of our program over time. And I think there's an opportunity when we think about the initiatives that are kind of on the table here and opportunities to work together to kind of help corporate partners really see how far back that pipeline goes, right? That while they are willing to invest in Europe, right, post LAUSD to bring about a timeline and a diversified workforce, there is still an opportunity to invest even further back in high school and elementary school, middle school, and able to support that pipeline coming down the journey, coming down the way.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. Oh, Scattered, what's up? It's Brandon. Nice to finally meet you from a distance. I'll have to shake your hand in a second. Oh my God, shout out to TXT. Okay. My name is Brandon Nicholson, Executive Director of the Hidden Genius Project based in Oakland, California. Our mission is to train and mentor Black male youth in technology creation, entrepreneurship, and leadership skills to transform our lives and communities. Very, proud to be the director of our organization, 7 years in, and our core component is an intensive for Black male youth, but over time, we've been able to continue to grow our work, expand our work, and expand our reach, in large part due to the brilliance and the assets of our young men and our alumni that we've trained, who are now providing programming for a wide array of young people of different backgrounds, genders, so on and so forth. That having been said, as excited as I am to have my role, I will probably be continuing the Disgruntled Bald Black Man Hour, picking up where Kamal left off in some respects, but no, very much based from a place of hope and positive experience. So, but I will say before I jump in, just 2 points, that Kamal uplifted there, some latent asterisks I just want to name and make explicit, particularly one being around testing and prep, and Kamal did point to bias in testing, certainly reading Ibram Kendi's Stand from the Beginning, among other texts over the years and generations, but continues to underscore that. And also just the fact that, I'm a grown man driving a Kia, it rides good, to, just got over 100,000 miles, but my car note when I had it actually was probably dwarfed by the annual expenditure on test prep for a increasing proliferation and proportion of folks getting that 1550. So lest we get it twisted real quick, just about proclivities or natural proclivities and this and that. And I know Kamal was not suggesting this, I'm just pointing it out to make it explicit. When you spend more on test prep than I spend on my Kia, you are going to score better, right? And whether you, one, know that you need to do that in the first place, or two, have the resources to execute that. So we can come back to that at some point as well. Also, as I mentioned, I am a Black man, and yet, like, if I just talk about Black man stuff all the time, sometimes people will be like, it seems like he's just angry about this stuff. So I like to just point out what's happening for other groups, certainly here in Oakland. So I am a visitor here in the community around Los Angeles, as they say, right? But also I understand that we're also on indigenous land, certainly. And so that's a group that, we pay a great deal of attention to, even though that's not in our primary mission. But also, I'd just like to call out, organizations that are comprised of so many engineers from the Big Ten schools or whatever, and write books on data and hiring and all these things, and yet cannot, for some reason, disaggregate their Asian and Asian American data. Now, they can distinguish between migrant group or immigrant group and not. But I really wanted to see if a VC would just seed me $1 million to bet 10 tech companies 10 times if they could tell me what proportion of their Asian Pacific Islander employees are Filipino or Filipino American. It being the second most populous group in our state, I imagine I'd be $10 million richer by the end of that circuit, and I'd be able to fund all of our work with the Hidden Genius Project unrestricted. There's a lot to dig into in terms of that Asian group and Pacific Islander group as well. The work we do it from an assets base. And yes, there's a lot of themes have been raised up around math, around computing, around how we've named things and rebranded. But fundamentally, and Oscar said it, we never believe that, coding will save a life or end poverty, right? It's really about helping and inspire young people. We're a youth development and youth-centered organization first and foremost, and we build the skills around it. When we think about what it looks like to do that work as we work with industry or with philanthropy, the word that came up for me in thinking and wanted to speak with you all today was community. That community is the theme that should drive it all. I can just start with a quick story. We were updating our volunteer information form or application form. We were very fortunate to get so many people who reach out to us willing to volunteer, including people from corporate backgrounds. And the initial copy of the description of the form mentioned how we wanted to connect with our community partners and our business and corporate partners. And probably to the chagrin of the staff that were working on this, I asked them to change the language, even though it might have seemed semantic, but I said it's important that business and corporate partners see themselves as community partners, as part of our community. If they're not community partners, then I don't see what the point of working with them is, right? So just to be at a school or a church makes you community, but if I'm at this company in this community benefiting from the tax dollars paid from members of the community, I'm not of the community, we're going to have a disconnect and it's going to deepen over time. And I just want to point out a few ways in which community can either bring us together or push us farther apart. One I would say would be around narrative, right? So if we feel removed from community, for example, we're talking a lot about young people today. We don't have a lot of young people in the room per se, right? And that's fine. It's not a knock. What I'm saying is, I always thought with our mission statement, which for our intensive, we make each participant in our intensive immersion program actually memorize the mission statement, right? One, so they understand why they're there. We pay them a stipend and we give them a lot of stuff, including our energy and our love, so they should at least know like why. But secondly, you should have a mission statement that your young people should be comfortable hearing you say right next to you, right? And also you should be able to have conversations about young people that they'd be comfortable hearing you talk about right next. I can't talk about our young people in the form of gaps because I have to like live with these people. You know what I'm saying? Like we got to kick it. So I can't always talk about them as, I can't say Jaime as a young person in our program. If only you were more like Joe. There's this gap between you and Joe, but we're going to get you white enough one day. You're going to make it, Jaime. Just look at Joe and we're going to get you there. You look at him, right? And you're going to get to Joe. That's not, one, it's not good pedagogy, but two, it's just not an applicable approach. It's not an effective approach to the work that we do. Young people we work with are brilliant. They don't want to hear about what gaps they need to supersede. That doesn't mean they don't want to or need to hear about things they got to do, tighten up on the algebra from time to time, absolutely. But there's work that we do in terms of talking about who they are and how they show up that's really important. So I start there. But another way this plays out is when we think about this idea of just the facts of who our young people are, right? So when we talk about Nicholson, for example, in consecutive special reports now, I believe it was 2016 and 2018, they've actually done studies on the efficacy, effectiveness, and prominence of Black youth in tech, particularly as it pertains to early adoption of technology and then in social media and technology engagement, particularly content generation. Now, that's not in computing and engineering, and it's not in core math skills, but what it's saying, in short, is Black folks do tech. Young Black folks do tech a lot, really well. They're very daring at it, but get this, if that's not enough, everybody else loves when Black folks do tech to the point that it makes lots of people lots of money. And I don't have a problem with anything that Kamau said, and I don't have a problem with Google hiring from the top 10 and this and that and whatever. But when companies create entire marketing strategies off the content of 17-year-old Jaime's and Kamau's, who supposedly are manifestations of gaps. Remember? That's your guy right there. That's the guy you're supposed to be. So Jaime's supposed to be Joe. But then I pay Joe when he grows up to follow Jaime on Twitter and Instagram and then just repackage what Jaime created back, and then Joe got the bonus. So there's a gap, but clearly there wasn't a gap in competency or creation. So that's crazy to me. That's crazy that that's the thing. He got paid right off of what he created. He just sold it back to him, right? And there's a gap. I can't tell Jaime that there's a gap. Yo, somebody's taking your stuff. Nicholson said it. Nicholson, I didn't make this up, right? They did the data, but we see it all the time, right? Well, our young men are not following Joe. They're following each other, right? Our young people are following each other. And then they know Joe's following them too. And they're trying to get likes and they're trying to get their clout up. So that's very important because those roles are in these companies. And we're not getting those roles either. How many IHOP tweets do you have to see with the words on fleek in them, right? Or Yas burgers, right? The people with that job are not the people producing that content. And that's not a gap. And Jane, you shouldn't beat yourself up because, Jane, you didn't do that, right? That's leadership. That's people who don't want to hire sometimes our young people or our adults or whatever it is, deciding not to hire, but then recognizing that we're producing. And so if we can produce Yas burgers and pancakes on fleek, pretty sure we can build some stuff too, like the stoplight, like the pyramids, like the gas mask, super soaker, and not to mention the first computer I ever had, built by a middle-aged black woman who couldn't get advanced at the company she was at, so she had to be a consultant, was born without the vote in the South, so her scores were never going to be great because her SAT scores, because her school was super segregated, right? But she sure as hell could build a computer. That thing ran forever. She would have been doing great had she not been a black woman named Jenny from the South. So yeah, there's that too. So in terms of what it looks like to then work with companies, we need companies to be in community and understand that and own that, right? And just own that the narrative around, we're talking about young people's gaps and not knowing enough. They certainly know enough to run your marketing strategy without getting paid for it. I'll move along to the next point I wanted to make, which is about well-meaning narrative we have around the idea of, available jobs by 2030 or 2040, jobs that could be filled by H-1B visas, Oscar references, right? I went to Oakland schools, kindergarten through 8th grade, Oakland public schools, and then went to a prep school in Marin County for high school, very wealthy county. That's what solidified my interest in educational equity. From then on, got to be in communities of privilege a lot going forward. Not once, not one time in my life have I ever heard any family or community of privilege speak to a young person from an adult perspective about getting in a role or a job or a pathway that could one day be available that's not filled today. And it sounds, when you don't think about it, right, it's like, sure, of course, it makes sense. There's like 3 million engineering jobs and we can fill them with black and brown kids. But no one ever said, like, not once did someone say, Joe, you know what job's not going to be around, or not going to be filled? You should get that job. Because if Joe said, I love cooking and I want to have my own restaurant someday, or I want to be CEO of a food company or what have you, we didn't say, well, Joe, that job's taken. Can you pick something else, an entirely different sector or field? Never say that. We never say that to folks of privilege and communities of privilege. So why would we say that to our young people, our low-income young people, our young people of color who have passions and interests? And yeah, many of them want to do jobs that are already taken. That's okay. If I still need to be in my job by the time Jaime gets old enough to take it, then I've got a deeper issue, right? Like, I want people to take my job. So if this is a passion of yours, I'm not trying to train you for jobs that need to be filled because of H-1B visas and immigration. If that's not your passion, why am I encouraging you in that respect? And when we talk about, a lot of times, I wrote my dissertation around sports because we talked about, so many people were quoting Ogbu, talking about how, black males were obsessed with sports. And I don't understand how you can now buy a sports team, an NBA team, for $1 billion and not be, as a white man, and not be obsessed with sports. All the most obsessive people I knew with sports were not black males. They were white guys paying a lot of money. If I had $1 billion, you know what I wouldn't do? Spend it on a sports team, right? Probably put it away. That's very obsessive behavior, right? So why are we demonizing folks, And at the same time, there's some Filipina young woman in the community who loves basketball, who's being told that a professional sports career is not realistic for her, who's then having to look at some job that's not going to be filled in 15 years. All the while, some white guys are going to get hired as next director of analytics in some new tech space for the Houston Rockets and get to learn on the job, right? Because he didn't give up on his dream and because he got his network game together. So what does that tell you? We're actually doing a disservice to our young people if we're not working with companies and organizations to look at what's ahead. And I appreciate, Oscar pointing to that in terms of how we reframe poverty. And we're not working with them to work with our young people around our interests. They'll never find out that, the fastest way to a pro sports career today is in tech. It just is. We've done multiple events with the Warriors on this. They're hiring around it all the time. It could be social media. It could be analytics. It could be, what they're doing in VR. It could be what they're doing in artificial intelligence and big data. It's just there. But if we're not hearing that, then we keep looking at these roles that are supposedly not going to be filled in 15 years and not at the stuff we love that could get me to jump in that math class. Because the one thing I know about our young people in our communities is when we need to figure it out, we do. Right? You can't tell me all these communities for which structures were not built for us in the first place that have continued to thrive and be persistent and resilient have not been able to get to this point without being able to figure it out. And yes, it's probably the case that, the state policy wasn't the reason that we got there. So when I know that that's where I want to go, I just need to figure it out. And now I've got a network and access and resources, I can get there. So that's really important for us. And so as I wrap, Joe, sorry, is, I think when I think about this concept of, how we get in community, it's just that we need organizations that we work with, be it in philanthropy, be it companies, so on and so forth, just to understand this, have some humility, right? Know that there's no birthright to computing excellence. There's no birthright to employment excellence. There's understanding what you're looking for and then understanding the different ways in which that manifests. So if you're looking for someone who's going to be resilient, take a task and run with it. A lot of people can do that, if they could get to where they got to, at UC Irvine, because they didn't get into LA, but, they had housing instability for 4 years during high school. Like, damned if they can't figure out that TPX report by next Monday, right? You're talking about folks who, GAP's vice president of risk management loss prevention, black guy from Chicago. And I just told him straight up, I said, I could not think of a better person to be vice president of risk management loss prevention, right? Straight out the South Side, and he died laughing, right? Who else would know more about that? What are you looking for in this job, right? If Frank Abagnale could get paid to help you figure out how to not take bad checks, right? We can do the jobs on loss prevention and risk management because you've had to have situational awareness since you were 11 years old, right? Like, let's be honest, and that's what we've asked companies to do. And some of them have done that. We've had a solid relationship with Google, but in terms of a very concrete example, what I'll share is Uber. Uber was the one of all people, of all the companies that created one of the most fascinating and interesting partnerships with us. Why? Because they're a little bit desperate. They kept getting bad press over and over and over. And a buddy of mine from high school who had gone through it, gone up against it, been kind of the manifestation of so many things Kamal described that were all structural, all systemic, had nothing to do with his effort, but he clawed his way back through these dumbass systems and somehow, after transferred 3 times, graduated undergrad from UC Berkeley, master's in business from Stanford, actually decided to keep going because people didn't believe he could still be a product manager in tech, even though it was all he ever did. So he went to Georgia Tech and got a BA after he got his MBA in computer science, just so he could prove to the people that he could do tech and product manage. Got it, took it. Google still wouldn't give it to him, so he went to Uber, and he was like, you know what? This was a ridiculous path. Let's do something different. I'm going to advocate for a different program. Let's go, while these folks are desperate, getting all this bad press, and ask if we can come up with a new career prep program where you develop an apprenticeship, but that we're going to advocate for students from community college. Recognizing that the top 10 is great, but if you can navigate through community college, still get out of there, transfer, and finish at a 4-year, you've done something more complex than any computer science assignment you'll get at Georgia Tech or University of Waterloo. You know what I'm saying? And they did, and they built it, and now it's in year 2, right? And they gave us, some slots and what have you, but they opened it up nationwide. This year, they've opened it up to young women and folks of Latinx backgrounds and other backgrounds, and it's a really great thing, but it took a lot of humility. Uber was literally humbled by the experiences they were having, so they were willing to try something different, right? But what it meant was that we could work together, and they could say, you're right, not everything that we do in this space has to be done by someone from the University of Waterloo. If we can get good people and train them in what we do and get them early, it's probably less expensive to us, but then more valuable, and then we spend less time hiring. And so there's a bunch of examples we've seen like this, but it was this idea of me having a buddy with whom I was in community, who then got everyone else in that company started thinking of these people as part of their community. And now these folks of all different backgrounds, these VPs, C-level folks have an investment in these young people. And so that community thread then shines through so brightly. And so if you feel like that's not you, you're not going to come up with that solution. But when you feel like, oh, this is my neighbor, these are my people, we're going to see people for who they are and figure it out. So I know I said I'd wrap. That was the wrap. I know we'll come back to it. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
So I came because you promised me Star Wars tickets. And then I found out he was lying to me the whole time. So I'm actually not from California. I'm from Phoenix. I live in Phoenix, and I came out because I think this is an important topic. Just a quick background. I am a first-generation American, born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, New York. New Yorkers in the house? All right. Yeah, all loud and annoying, just like we like to be. I grew up in Hell's Kitchen, old school Hell's Kitchen from the 70s and 80s, when it was really Hell's Kitchen. And I grew up with a single mother on welfare and food stamps. And I feel a personal responsibility to be out at these events in front of people because I can make one of two assumptions. Either the reason I've been at Google for 13 years. How long have you been I don't even know how long you've been at Google. Huh? 13, oh, not even 30. That's why I didn't know who he was. I'm like, I thought I knew every single person that worked at Google. I've been at Google for 13 years. I launched Google Apps for Education into the university space, launched Google Apps in the K-12, and then launched Chromebooks in education. So I've been doing this education and technology thing for a long time. I spent 7 years at Accenture before that. I have a master's degree, and I can make one of two assumptions. I can either assume that I am a super genius with a 500 IQ, and that's what my wife thinks I think, or there are millions of kids who are just like me, who aren't given the opportunity, don't have the visibility, don't have the structural things that we need for this to take place. And I'm kind of betting on that one. I launched my own company called Ghetto People Productions. And the whole point of this company is to go find talented ideas that we can connect with tech co-founders and with people who can create business plans and with funders. And, you know, it's nice to have a couple billionaires as friends. Those types of organizations are what we need in this world to go find those good ideas, those talented people. One of the most frustrating things I found today was this idea of preparing kids for careers, preparing kids for jobs. When I want to find opportunities for these kids, for these students, for these young people to actually go out and build organizations and build the capacity. And this is what I mean, because I want to end today, at least for me, in a positive way, which is to say this, that I think we live in extraordinary times. This idea that we are, high-tech companies, I find that phrase, high-tech companies, funny because is your car company not high-tech? Is your banking institution not high-tech? What is your medical institution not high-tech? It's high-tech is everything, right? So it's not about working at jobs in high-tech companies. It's just about high-tech in everything. And we now live in the digitalized economy, right? And we have to face that. But here's the thing. We've been dealing with this for 30, 40 years. This is not a new thing. When I showed up at work, I worked for Governor Cuomo. That was my first job. When I showed up at work, there was a machine sitting on my desk. And there was this machine where I can send out letters. They call them emails. And I could sit there and type up this thing called an email and send it to the person that I wanted to communicate with. And just a couple of years before that, if I wanted to do the same thing, I had to write that letter on a piece of paper and hand it to what we used to call typing pools, where people would sit in a circle and then they would take your piece of paper. Young people are looking at me like I'm insane. They would take your piece of paper and write and type it up for you on a typewriter, give it back to you, and you would edit, and you go back and forth for 2 weeks. And then they would put it in an envelope and mail it to whoever they were mailing it to, right? That was the process. And now I had this automation tool sitting on my desk. What's happening is that it's happening faster and faster and faster. Change happens gradually and then suddenly. We now live in the sudden part. And that's what we need to react to, is that we need to help students build the skills that they need for this fast-paced, sudden part that we live in now. And we all know what they are, right? Problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, all these things that we often talk. We talk about these things so much, we call them 21st century skills. We're 20 years into the 21st century. We're still talking about 21st century skills. We need to take those skills with the content, the math, the algebra, the computational thinking, all the content stuff together, working together to build the skills that students need. When I launched Google Apps for Education, when I was part of that team, what I was expecting is not what happened. What I'm expecting from schools is to be able to take these tools and say, what are the best ideas that we have in education? What do we know works? What do we know are the best things that we can do for learning? Make it engaging, make it relevant, having kids do actionable things, project-based learning, all these things. And then ask ourselves, how do we use these technology tools to bring these ideas to life? And we haven't done that in education. What we've done is we've taken those tools and just put them on top of the current system, making the old system a little bit faster and a little bit more efficient. And that's not what we need to do. What we need to do is take those tools and ask ourselves, how can we build the best education models that we have to do that? And I think we live in a time of extraordinary opportunity. The speed at which learning can happen today is insane, right? I just launched a YouTube channel that you should all subscribe to. And, no, I mean right now while I wait. So I launched a YouTube channel, and when I launched this YouTube channel 6 months ago, I knew nothing. I was a photographer, but knew nothing about film, knew nothing about editing, knew nothing about how to do any of that. And I said to my daughter, who lives in New York, works at CNN, she's a video producer, she's an expert in this space, right? She makes fake news. She was doing she does it really well. I asked her, hey, what do I need to know to start my YouTube channel? What's the first thing I need to learn how to do? And she said, shoot in 1080, 24 frames per second. If you want to shoot slow-mo, shoot at 60 frames per second. Keep your shutter speed at double the frame rate. And if you're going to shoot outside, you're going to need an ND filter because you want to keep your ISO at 100. And I said, cool. What do any of those words mean? Knew nothing about this. And now I'm making videos, and I'm posting them, and I'm editing them. The speed at which learning can happen today is insane. So to Kamal's point about algebra, if algebra is the most important thing that our students need to learn in 9th grade, let's focus on that. And there's opportunities everywhere to learn. It's just a question of will. So the other part of why I came here today is because I believe in the responsibility of those of us of color to be back out in our communities and supporting through work that we do with nonprofits and organizations that support education. So for me personally, I sit on the Science Foundation Board of Directors in Arizona, and I'm sitting around a table with the guy who created the IBM 360 and a guy who won the Nobel Prize. I'm the stupidest person in the room, and I like that. But we are doing things in science for high school kids in Arizona, right? That's one thing. I sit on the board of Mi Familia Vota, which is about educating young people, especially Latinos, about voting and the importance of civic engagement and what needs to do. I just joined the board of another science program in Arizona around teaching kids about space and mathematical formulas about how you figure out space and those types of things. So I joined that board. We need to be in those organizations, to be as board members, to be influencers so that we can influence the types of things that we can do. Because when I talk to students, I talk to thousands of students a year, and this year about 2,000 students. I say to them, especially the ones that are growing up the way I grew up, I tell them that the way they're growing up, their experiences, their hardships, those things that they've experienced are actually competitive advantage. Because when they go make it in the world, and that's our job, is to help them make it in the world, they're going to have a unique point of view. They're going to have a different perspective. They're going to have a unique way of looking at problems and solutions. And in a world where we all have access to the same information, having information has no value. It's a commodity. It's how you take that information and create intelligence. And we need to help kids find ways to build intelligence from all the information that's out there. And so I try to find nonprofits that do that kind of work, and I try to work with them to influence them to focus on the right things. Because again, if nonprofits are focused on helping kids take tests, that's great, but that's not where we're going to change the game. And I think that we can find ways to change the game. And last thing I'll say is this. As a personal responsibility, I think you need to be in the classroom. So I started a school in Phoenix called the Phoenix Coding Academy. And this is a school focused on computer science, but not computer science as a training element, but computer science as an element, a language in everything that kids learn. So it's algebra with computer science, and art with computer science, and history with computer science. kids learn it not as a class, but over 4 years. And this school is in downtown Phoenix, and we're trying things that are different. For example, there's no homework at the school because homework is an equity issue. There's no grades because grades are an equity issue. We're trying things differently there. And I teach 10th grade communication skills. Because at the end of the day, no matter what program you're involved in, no matter what you do, unless those kids can see you in front of them, they can say, this guy's an idiot, just like I am. I can do what he does. I can easily become what he's become. Unless you're in that classroom. And by the way, I teach 90 kids communication skills about every 4 weeks I go in. And it's the hardest thing that I do. But to go in there and be in front of those kids and have conversations and build relationships, that's where, if one of those kids changes, if one of those kids, that's how we change. Because I believe education disrupts poverty. I believe education is what changes families' destinies. Not just your family, families forever and ever and ever, right? So I think it's the most important thing that we can focus on. And I think we live in extraordinary times where we can do extraordinary things, and I don't think we're doing that yet.
Thank you, Jaime. And before we go to Lorena, I'm wondering, so you just said something about communication. So you said it's the hardest thing I do. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, no, the hardest thing I do is teach 10th graders, right? And by the way, if you are a presenter, if you are someone who's out in front of people, go present in front of 10th graders. Because if you can keep them engaged, you can keep anybody engaged.
Fair enough. So Brandon and Jaime have laid out from their position of privilege and power how they've built community and help really change the rules of the game, which is what I'm hearing from both of you from your space. So now what we're going to do is break down some of these partnerships to the local level when we think about philanthropy. So we're going to, John Garcia is going to speak after Lorena, who's from the LA County office, or the LA County, I should say, not county office. And then Wilma, Franco, actually Bob, and then Wilma is going to be our anchor speaker. And we're going to reinforce points that we heard, and we're going to talk about solutions. What's one thing you'd like to see change from your perspective as we think about the LA ecosystem? What needs to change? And before you go there, to give us a sense of what you're currently doing to address the deep inequities that have come up, but really thinking about how do we prepare young people for systems, or even just create their own systems, and that may not see themselves in a certain place, but to help them understand and see themselves in a new place.
My name is Lorena Bautista. I'm from the County of Los Angeles Chief Executive Office. I'm actually here representing my boss, HARVEY KAWASAKI, who's the CEO manager for the Service Integration Branch. And I wanted to say thank you to Larry and Sunny, CATF. Talk about new things that we're doing. We've just partnered with CATF and YMCA. We're exploring that relationship right now, and sustainability. But current efforts that we have going on right now, things that right now that are short-term as well as long-term strategies. We have My Brother's Keeper. We adopted the President Obama's challenge, where we're looking at improving outcomes for young boys and men of color. We're also, as part of that, looking at a youth diversion countywide initiative where we're looking at reducing the rates of young men who are being incarcerated, men of color entering into the juvenile justice system. Also, we have the Women and Girls Initiative here. I have my colleague here, Imelda Padilla, who's here from the Women and Girls Initiative, looking at inequitable gender inequalities and how to improve those outcomes for women and girls countywide. We also have the Children's Savings Account, which we looked at from the city, for children to, it's a long-term strategy for kids to learn how to begin to save for college. So earlier you heard from my colleague, Kate Anderson from the Center for Strategic Partnerships. So one thing that we're looking at that's very new is expanding our relationship with philanthropy. So bringing in the Center for Strategic Partnerships and looking at the philanthropic world, how can we bring additional dollars into the county, reduce our dependence on net county costs, and bringing in new dollars. But as we move forward, we're working with, like I said, CETF and YMCA, how to help children and families, get involved with these strategies, as well as how can these strategies mirror the NTP project.
Could you say one solution or one thing you'd like to see change from your perspective?
Ooh.
How would it be more effective?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that we're changing. One thing is, like I said, collaborating more with community, collaborating with philanthropy. I think those are two new things that, since I've been in the county, that I've seen we've really embraced those relationships, really hearing the community, what we need to do as a county to improve outcomes for children and their families. And whether that be, academic outcomes, whether that be with LACO, with the CSI initiative, Community Schools Initiative, or whether that be health and mental health outcomes. So just like I said, embracing our engagement with community as well as with philanthropy.
Dr. Garcia.
Thanks, Joe. Good stuff. I mean, great hearing from folks and their perspectives. Lots of things that I was thinking about as folks were talking about. Definitely have some Phoenix connections. I grew up in Phoenix too, and a lot of folks there. So good that you're doing stuff there. When I got here this morning, there was a lot on my mind, and you could tell a lot of folks were like processing the results of the Measure EE, which is the parcel tax for LAUSD. And it was a little tough to focus on tech in schools when you're thinking about what's going to happen with the future of schools. Are they going to gut programs? Are they going to cut STEM programs and art programs and after-school programs and inflate class sizes? So that's been on my mind, and a lot of what's happened as well is, the business community and where they're at or not at here today, the local folks, and their presence not really being here, and them just really being a big part of the education ecosystem. But the reality is that we were on opposite sides for that measure, and there is a sense that there needs to be some reconciliation to take place. If we're going to move together to do this work, we're talking about the future of the economy, the future of education and workforce systems, they have to be here with us doing this collectively together. And we're just really not at a place locally in LA where we can really think about how do we envision that together right now. So that's something that's on my mind, but something I think we need to work on and get through. And it's a real reality of the context of LA. It's not a kumbaya moment for all of us right now. So there's some realities that are happening. So that being said, I'm a product of the public education system. I started out in community college. I left the business sector and actually went into education and became a school counselor, because who better to show kids the pathway to college and career than school counselors? That's why I joined. And so that led me to all kinds of different things. And now I'm in philanthropy, helping to fund nonprofits. But as we've got into more and more of that work, we've thought more about not just funding good efforts like what's happening in Long Beach and YMCA partners and SELA Collaborative and others, but really taking what they're doing and learning and trying to think about what's the systems angle for this. How do we help promote this across the system and create real equity within the system for those who don't have everything they need? So, in thinking about that and thinking about, where our corporate partners in this space, and thinking about how we're trying to transition our work as a foundation. We're an LA County-based foundation, been here doing work for over 100+ years in LA. We focus across the education pipeline. We do affordable housing, immigration work, and we also do civic engagement, health, and education. And thinking about, how we partner with the corporate world and our folks in the workforce, there's a lot of work that we even do in philanthropy too, where it's kind of sprinkling money around the margins. funding a small program here, a small effort there, but not thinking about the longer kind of greater connections to the system. And even when we see our work and where we do this as far as thinking about ourselves and trying to think about our work, but also with our corporate partners and trying to push them not to just think about charity, right, which is really triage in a space, but to think about what does real structural investment look like, right? Because there's folks that show up and they're doing charity, and maybe that's partly marketing, maybe that's partly PR, maybe that's partly because you have an issue, a legal settlement going on, and you want to put some money in the community, right? That's the realities of how folks show up sometimes, or maybe you want future consumers. There's some real realities of how folks enter this space. So I think it's really a partnership to talk about what does structural investment look like. How do we get closer to the actual people on the ground in communities and what they need, and do some actually user-based design, and not just think about engaging at the margins and not showing up when we need to, right? I'm glad Google's here and I'm glad other folks are here, but where's their VP of HR? They should be here thinking about really structural investments and how to really open opportunity for folks, right? So those are things I was thinking about. And I also want to, just also kind of double down on the sentiment that education is important, but, we think about technology. Technology itself is not the answer. Technology is a tool. And so what I also agree with is that, learning is the real goal in this space. And I think about learning very broadly, not just math and reading, but learning to learn, right? Critical thinking, social emotional development, identity development, how to be a good citizen and engage in the civic space, how to team. All those things are very important in today's world. And the way that our current school system is set up is that teachers are really receptacles of knowledge. And it used to be like that because there was not a lot of access to knowledge and information in this space, right? So they're funneling knowledge together down to students and giving them what exactly they need, right? And then a lot of times, filtering out students and parts that you're going to go to college, you're not, and so forth too. We're in a different era. We're in an era where knowledge is ubiquitous, and education should really be about a place where we're helping kids understand how to navigate that world of knowledge, right? And education, and specifically, I would say technology in education is a tool for doing that. But I think we need to go a little bit further in thinking about how to do that. And I love the idea of breaking up the old school paradigm of schools and industrial education, where it's like, why do we need to have prerequisites for learning? If you want to learn something, try to learn it, and we'll help you learn it, right? Why do we need to group people by age? Why not go by competency, or try to mix people together in different ages? Why do we have to have walls between classrooms and subject areas? Why not do it interdisciplinary? Because the world's interdisciplinary, right? So those are the different things that I think we should be thinking about. And we're actually, as a foundation, pushing some innovation work in that space called Transform Learning LA, where we're saying learning is much more about everything that we need students to be about for their engagement, not just in the world of work and college, but also to be good citizens. And so how do we get more schools to take on those kinds of things like project-based learning, multiple measures assessment, partnering with post-secondary institutions and I would say workforce folks about entry, right? Because similarly too, it's not really about your ability necessarily. I would say it's about your potential, right? So instead of creating these barriers to get into tech, for example, they're just going to the top 10 Ivies or whatever it may be, or whatever the higher education institutions are doing as well too. Why not say, you know what, a lot of these students don't have the opportunity, right? But they have the potential, let's let them in, and then we'll get them up to where they need to be at. We'll invest in them once they're there. We're not gonna create the barriers. So those are the types of things I would love to see when it comes to our partnerships with workforce and our community partners, is how to push more of that kind of work, how to take what's happening in communities and elevate that to scale through kind of structural investment.
I'm a little nervous in speaking with you today, and let me tell you why. Because half of you in my room are my friends, and I've been doing this work for 37 years in youth development. But the main reason I'm nervous is everything I say better be honest, because the youth in the room are my youth, and they're very important to me, and I want to make sure I honor them. I'm also Navajo Apache Indian, and so I believe this work is sacred. When you help another human being through a developmental process in life, that is sacred. We don't use words like that. We use institutional words. And I also believe that people have to heal. Culturally, people in poverty have to heal. So when we talk about institutions and skill building, we have to include social, emotional, cultural into that equation in order for young people to have value and hope and honor their ancestors' struggles to get them to where they're at now. I wanted to really share that because we really don't talk about that. And because of that, a lot of our institutions aren't relational, they're institutional. They're about compliance and grades. The Youth Institute, I started 20 years ago. My bio is wrong. I've been in this business for 27 years. I've been in youth development 38 years. The Youth Institute was started because we wanted young people to use technology as a tool to tell stories in their communities, to heal. My degree's in journalism. I got a 1590 on the SAT, and I didn't like math. So I didn't want to go into math. I wanted to write. And so I'm the youngest of 12 kids raised in poverty as a Navajo Apache Indian kid. My journey and my calling, if you will, has been to help young people find their journey and their calling. And that should be really what we talk about here. We should get back to the relational aspect of what we do, because in the Youth Institute, it's a youth development program that teaches high-end, cutting-edge digital content technology to urban high school youth and connects that technology to social, emotional, workforce, academic learning. And when we talk about a youth development program, a lot of us say youth development, youth development. Youth development is relationship building first, pro-social bonding, skill building, social, emotional, workforce, academic, and cultural skill building. Safety, safety of place, psychological safety, community involvement, moving from hopeless to hopeful, moving from victim to activist, and ladders of leadership where youth become leaders, where youth master skills. And then I espouse to the 5 levels of learning. Learning that's active. You know, sitting in a room all day, I feel sorry for all of us. It's hard. Young people need to be active. Learning that's collaborative, working in groups. That's why I love filmmaking and content creation, because it requires them to negotiate with each other. That is a corporate skill. Learning that supports mastery. I have confidence in my competence. I am good at something. Learning that expands horizons. The reason why a lot of our kids are disengaged with school, one reason. They never get the heck out of their neighborhoods to connect real-world context to academic rote didactic learning in a book. They need opportunities. The best part of my life is going to happen next week. I'm with 400 high school kids on a wilderness retreat for 3 weeks up at Mammoth, California. And they're all urban kids of color, and the program's free because of relationships we have with philanthropists, some of them in this room. These are the kind of things that have to happen for young people to heal in order to navigate adolescence and thrive in adulthood. When we talk about technology, John's right, it is a tool. It can be used in a lot of different ways. It is a content creator. Our youth, we focus on movie making, graphic design, web design, 3D printing. 3D printing is one of the most artistic expressions out there. To be able to make something within a day and pitch it, that is a corporate skill. Our young people can't do it alone with an agency. I've replicated youth institutes now at 26 sites in the United States, 1 in Canada, 1 in South Africa, 1 in Cambodia. We have replicated urban and rural. We created it with a framework and evaluation in mind. We have done qualitative, quantitative, control group, anecdotal evaluations on this program over 20 years. We also have Where Are They Now? All of my board were our kids, and they're engineers and social workers and teachers. For those of you who've been in as long as I have kids who I go wine drinking with who are 35 years old. I have young people who are in communities that their young people are now my staff. To see my young college-age photographer here, and one of our young people that's running a youth program that was one of our kids, and one of our senior staff who was my kid at 13. And Oscar Menjavar, who was one of my staff learning this right out of college in 2003, is an honor and a journey. And this is why we do this. Because at the end of the day, we want to move people out of poverty. And the best way to do it, the best way to move people out of poverty is to look at the glass half full, have relationships with them, honor their journey, and move them forward. And one of the things that really excites me about this is you can't do that alone as an agency. You have to have humility, and you have to have honor to everybody else's knowledge. I think of Los Angeles County. I couldn't pay my kids if it wasn't for LA County Summer Jobs Program, and they're poor. I think of the California Community Foundation. Working with them on immigration issues and causes, and how do we help our newcomer immigrants succeed in society and not hide in shadows. That is an issue near and dear to my heart. We have to fight that. We have to help folks. And I think of Google. We received a grant at Google to do digital literacy for some of the lowest income communities in California. Those are the kind of collaborations that we need, because all of us have skill sets, but when we combine skill sets, then lots of good things happen. Human IT right now is in the room, and they're actually giving computers away and teaching digital literacy to our families in Long Beach, because we don't do that, but we have them at every one of our events. We have to think differently. The city of Long Beach, you know, they've changed dramatically. We work directly with the Office of Equity, the Office of Mental Health, in order to do things like mental health first aid, trauma-informed care for our young people. Remember this is what I'd like to tell all foundations. The more trauma young people have had in their lives, the more supports and interventions they need to be successful. And that costs money. That costs money. We have to do wraparound programming for our young people, especially when they've had trauma in their lives. And I have proven that without a shadow of doubt. I can show you outcome data like you wouldn't believe. We are published. We have 6 publications. We are in Youth Today. We have publications of adults who come back and say, if it wasn't for this intervention, we wouldn't be successful adults today. And that's what feeds me, is that journey. The journey of collaboration, the journey of partnership, the journey of struggle to help our black, brown, yellow brothers and sisters make it in our world. And so I just wanted to share that because I'm very passionate about what I do. And more importantly, I'm very passionate about working with the people in this room.
I'm actually going to stand up because I feel like I'm really short and I can't move back and I feel like I'm falling. So I'll stand. I'm Wilma Franco. I'm the director of the SELA Collaborative. I think I'll briefly just give some information around the collaborative, and I think it'll help me frame the conversation around some of the solutions that, as I was hearing the conversation today, the collaborative, we're a network of organizations working together to really uplift the communities of the Southeast region. So that's 8 cities and 2 unincorporated areas. So when we talk about collaboration, we're doing that, right? We're asking different partners to come to the table to really address systems challenges to this region, right? A region that has not received this fair amount of resources. And I think as I was thinking about solutions and what can we do, it's really based on how the collaborative has begun its work. And we founded the initial steps of it on this notion of changing narrative, right? And really the power that we have to empower our communities to really speak for themselves, right? So a lot of the work that we initially did was around looking at the community from an asset-based analysis instead of saying, oh, we don't have enough of X, Y, and Z, right? But really looking at like what should we be honoring from our communities. And I think as I reflect on the conversation and a lot of what has been shared, one of the things that comes to mind for me is this notion of power sharing, right? A lot of us in this room have specific roles in our organizations, but what I don't see in the room is a lot of youth and a lot of community members, and we're having conversations about potential solutions of what we can do without the people that the solutions impact the most, right? And I think that for me, I think one of the reasons why I gravitated and I'm very honored to be with the collaborative is because we're really focusing on our work and how do we give voice to those people that haven't had a voice, right? How do we empower them to really be advocates for themselves and for their communities? I see our role as employers and philanthropy and leaders as being content experts. That means that we know how the system functions, we know what things need to be moved and who we need to have different conversations with, but our residents in our community and our family and our children are really the context experts, right? It's their lives, it's their community, it's their neighborhoods, and they know best what they need, right? And I think oftentimes we don't create the space at the table to really ensure that those voices are really directing the way that we are making decisions and are not part of the decision-making process, right? So I think for me, one of the things that as I was reflecting on just this entire conversation, was this idea of power sharing, but also how do we define collaboration? This whole entire day, we've mentioned collaboration, and I think oftentimes we walk into the spaces assuming that we all define collaboration the same way. And I think one of the conversations that I've had with different partners has been there's a difference between cooperation and collaboration, right? Cooperation is, can you help me move this chair, right? That's you're assisting me, right? Collaboration requires action, requires commitment, requires to be at the table even when things don't seem to be moving in the direction that you want them to move, right? I always reflect on my dissertation process, and I always thought I'm going to start my doctoral program, and then in 3 years I'm going to be done. I never anticipated the process being so messy and wanting to cry and quit halfway through the program. I'm a single mom. I have 2 boys, and I entered that program with a newborn and a 3-year-old. So you can imagine how tough that was for me. But I think part of what I learned through that is that when we talk about system change requires time, requires commitment, and requires you to continue to come back to the table. Even when it seems like we're not making progress, we are making progress. And I think oftentimes we get stuck in that mindset of, well, here's the goal, and we still have not reached that goal. But systems change is a long-term process. We're talking about dismantling and changing structural systems that have been in place for so long. It cannot be done in the next year or 2, right? And I think oftentimes we don't take enough time to celebrate, the small victories that we have in the process, right? And I think for us, and one of the things that I talk with the collaborative is we're going to celebrate victories, big or small, right? Because they're helping us move towards that bigger goal. And I think one of the things that I would love to see in terms of solutions would be a lot of you in this space have a lot of knowledge, are considered experts, but how do we define expertise, right? Our residents are also, and our families are also experts, right? So how do we begin to really create space for them? And that can be done with, if you're not part of a board of a nonprofit, we're constantly looking for board members, right? How do you create and enter that space? Visit the communities that you're servicing. Visit the families that are going to be impacted by the work that you're doing, because oftentimes, and I spent 7 years before my work with the collaborative, with an organization that served students from kindergarten all the way until high school graduation, and then we gave them a scholarship to go on to college. And one of the things that I learned through that was that it's very easy to want to create change, but it's very difficult to really allow the community to be your partners and to be in partnership with you, right? And there's not a lot of resource, and I think the narrative had always been at-risk communities or these poor communities. And I myself am, an immigrant. I arrived here when I was 8, and never in my life did I consider myself poor nor under-resourced, right? I always, that wasn't the narrative that I had in mind, and it's often difficult to be in spaces where our communities are labeled for us, and we're not allowed to create that narrative for ourselves. So I think part of that is get to know our community, take time to visit the communities that you're serving, and take on that challenge of joining boards of organizations like the Y, SCDC, who are doing amazing work in the community to really create change and create new opportunities for our community.